Hi guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Drew, and I'm here to do a discussion video for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 353. And what is this discussion going to be on in this video? Well, it's going to be a very simple and straightforward discussion. In this video, we're just going to cover some new information that we learned about when it comes to the matchups and the locations of many of the heroes that we know and love in the story, who those heroes are going to be facing off against in their respective fights, where they're actually located, and what could potentially come out of those fights when it comes to their matchups. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be going over in this video, but before we get to that, let's cover a slight difference between the official and unofficial translations. And overall, there's just one slight difference, and it really doesn't affect the story as a whole. The difference comes from Spinner and when he's giving his speech, and how he's comparing Dabi to himself, and how in the unofficial translations, he compares himself to Dabi and says that he has nothing, but in the official translation, he is once again comparing himself to Dabi, but he is saying that Dabi has everything. So the difference is that in the unofficial translation, Spinner is talking about himself and saying that he is nothing, but in the official translations, he's saying that Dabi has everything and that he is great. So either way, it kind of gives the same feel of Spinner being very self-conscious in his own abilities and believing that he is lesser than everyone else, and that directly affects how he is in this actual fight and the changes that he has gone through. So with that out the way, let's just go over where the people are and who they're going to be fighting and how their fights are going. So let's start off with the first location that we got in this chapter, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 353, with Shoto and Ida. And we know for a fact that they are currently in the Camino Ward. And we do know that there are other heroes that are alongside them, which include Burnin, Onima, as well as Kido. And we don't know exactly what's going on with Onima and Kido, whether or not they're alive or not, but we do know for a fact that Burnin is alive. And we see the quote-unquote conclusion to the fight between Shoto and Dabi, with Dabi apparently being defeated, but most likely than not, he's actually not permanently down for the count, especially with the fact that we see a glowing light in his chest, which many people attribute to a bomb, while others attribute it to the Phoenix theory, which is the idea or the theory that Dabi actually has a Phoenix quirk that allows him to sort of kind of regenerate, and that the fire that is burning his skin, that when he's about to die, he will eventually come back to life. And that is a potential possibility, but what is just as likely is that Dabi still has like that burning hatred and flame inside of him that is about to be released in a possible big explosion that isn't necessarily going to kill him. So as far as we know, he is quote-unquote defeated, but we still do have other threats. And that main threat just being the giant Nomu that just many other smaller heroes are going up against. So at this moment, that fight has more or less concluded, but there's most likely more going to be going into that. And let's go into a new location that we actually haven't been to in this war, and that is the location near Jaku General Hospital, where Gigantomachia is currently being held. And for starters, this is confirmation that the area that we saw many chapters ago, where they're building a facility around Gigantomachia, is actually in the area where he was left, which makes sense because there is no way they could have feasibly been able to move him from that area. But also what is interesting is that the heroes that are here are Ashido, Mineta, Yanagi, Juzo, Kodai, and Kirishima. And those are the students that we know, but we also get to see that Mount Lady is also there as a pro hero. And that currently Gigantomachia is asleep, which is very hinted and alluding to the fact that he may be able to be woken up. And having Mount Lady there may be the best choice because she may be one of the very few, if not the only heroes, that can actually have a chance of going up against Gigantomachia, along having Mina and Kirishima there to potentially also confront Gigantomachia, having Ashiro eventually overcome her fear of Gigantomachia, as well as potentially being the individuals to take down Midnight's killer, who is also here. So here we're potentially setting up multiple different fights with multiple different characters against multiple different villains, and how each one of them is going to have some type of significance to the characters who are going to be involved in that fight, primarily Kirishima as well as Mina. And another battleground that is revealed in this chapter is actually the battleground of Takobo National Stadium, the stadium or the area where Class 1A participated in the provisional license exams so that they could get their provisional licenses. And here's where we get to see Sato, Ojiro, Sero, and a member from Class 1B named Suburaba. He is a character who's able to make air barriers using his mouth. And what is very interesting about this area is that we do not see any actual fighting in this area. We get to see these characters, but we do not get to see who they are fighting. And potentially who they are fighting is going to be just individuals, random villains. But also another possibility is that that could be potentially where Skeptic is. And that Skeptic is behind the scenes and forcing these characters to fight other people, looking exactly like their friends, which could lead to scenarios where they think that they're fighting someone that is a villain and they accidentally fight their friends and injure them, which could potentially lead to a character potentially dying, which may allude to Sero dying because he's the one that brings up that something is wrong with that area. So there is something going on there, and we're probably going to get to that at a later date, but it's time to go on to another area. Because the next area that was shown in this chapter is actually UA in the sky, and we already know who is there, so I could repeat them, or you could go check out this video where I talked about it a little bit earlier. But the people that we know are there include Bakugo, Mirko, Edshot, Nejire, Tamaki, Best Jeanist, and those are the individuals that are fighting Shigaraki, who is the only villain there. But you also have Power Loader, Cementos, potentially Ectoplasm, Mei, Momo, Lunch Rush, Kaminari, Fukadashi, Yu, Manuel, Aizawa, as well as Monoma, and how they are all playing a part or another trying to fight off Shigaraki, but it's going to be a very difficult fight, but at least it's showing that they are able to hold their own without the help of Deku. And we're most likely going to see them holding their own more, either right before Deku arrives or within the next few chapters. So now I'm going to talk about the individuals that remained in the area where the war started. And that is Aoyama and Fat Gum near a parking garage area near where Troy is located. And we see that these heroes are potentially going to go up against a newer villain introduced in this chapter named Kunita. And from what we understand so far, most likely he has some control over Flowers, as we get to see that Flowers bloomed up underneath him in the area where he is. As well as we get more confirmation that Aoyama is going to have to fight against Kunita alongside Fat Gum, while fighting against many other villains that are there to kill him for being a sort of rat with wings or a bat from Aesop's Fables. So that's kind of what that battle is setting up for, more characterization and potentially character growth and character development with Aoyama. But speaking of character growth and character development, we actually are going to talk about the next area, which is the area right in front of Central Hospital, where we get to see Koji and potentially Koda fighting against Spinner. And this is the fight that many people have most likely been looking forward to ever since Horikoshi hinted at a fight between Spinner and Shoji. And this chapter is setting up that fight proper, as we got a little bit more character development and characterization from Spinner in this chapter, and potentially as this fight goes on, we're gonna get a little bit more of that with Shoji as well. And let's not forget that Present Mike is here as well, but that is very important, because Present Mike is most likely going to be antagonistic towards Spinner when it comes to Kurogiri being rescued, because that is why Spinner is here. But we also need to remember that there are also other characters in Central Hospital. And as I mentioned in the review, you have Lady Naggin and Gran Torino, who Lady Naggin could potentially play a part in fighting against Spinner as well as these other villains. But then you also have Mr. Compress, who while they're trying to rescue Kurogiri, may discover Mr. Compress, which could shift Spinner's perspective a little bit more, showing that even though he's a villain, they are trying to save his life, and that potentially this could lead to Central Hospital being invaded, which could potentially also lead to the death of Gran Torino. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but if Central Hospital gets destroyed, Gran Torino may not survive that, because not only is he old, he is also still heavily injured, and is potentially on life support. And that's pretty much what is probably going to be set up near Central Hospital in the story of My Hero Academia. And let's go to the final location that was shown in this chapter, which is Gunga Mountain, where we get to see Endeavor and Hawks going up against All for One. But let's not forget that there are other heroes in this area, including Kamui Woods, Tokoyami, Shishido, Pixie Bob, and Tiger. And that potentially these characters could play into fighting against All for One, or some of the Nomus that are most likely in this area. But also, you know, it's just All For One. Most likely than not, Endeavor is going to have to be the one to take on All For One, as we see that All For One has a lot more quirks underneath his belt that we don't know of. So this fight is going to be completely different from the fight that we saw between All For One and All Might. And potentially you're going to have the #1 hero once again take down All For One, or the opposite could happen of All For One taking down the #1 hero. Something that he was unable to do in the story up until this moment. So that's probably something interesting that is being set up in this fight. And I'm going to go into an area that we didn't see in this chapter, and this kind of ties into something else that I want to bring up a little bit later, but we don't get to see the reactions of the characters that are at Okuto Island, the island where Tsuyu and Uraraka are at fighting against Toga, as well as we get to see the other heroes of Gang Orca as well as Cirrus fighting on that island, because you know the island belongs to Gang Orca because that is where his aquarium is located. But we also have to remember that they're potentially going to have to fight against some very, very hard villains. But we also have to keep in mind that there are some Nomu there that are most likely going to interfere in the fight between Toga and Uraraka, as well as the fact that it's going to be an obstacle for the heroes to fight against. But we also get to see that Moonfish is also there, and he is a very dangerous villain. But we also get to see that there's another villain that we saw during USJ, the water villain that has the ability to control water, and the fact that they are on an island may very much make him a very, very dangerous foe. And we do not, like I said, get the reaction in this chapter, but most likely they are in the middle of battle, and it's probably hard to communicate with them because they are on an island. And this brings up an idea that I have, because we get to see that there are confirmed 8 different locations where 8 different battles have occurred or are occurring, and that at first we only got to see 3 or 4 of those locations prior to this chapter, which means that there are potentially other areas in this war that we have yet to see yet. And I bring this up because of the 8 areas that we saw, there are potentially 2 other areas that we haven't seen. And this coincides with a panel that we saw of the metal domes encompassing certain villains, that there was a total of 10 domes encompassing 10 groups of villains. And because we've seen 8, potentially there are 2 left that we haven't seen. And that is potentially where these other villains or these other heroes are. Because we do know that there is an isolated location where All Might and Tsukachi are, and that could be a battleground on its own. And the areas that I think that could be where Central Hospital is, because that is where the last place that we really saw All Might and Tsukachi together, and that's where they were planning out what they're going to do with the villains. So they could be at Central Hospital. And if they are at Central Hospital, that means that Central Hospital is definitely being invaded by the villains. Or they could be at Shiketsu High, because we do know for a fact that Shiketsu, most likely like UA, has been fortified in a way to be very protective of the civilians, and that either the civilians are there where the villains may go to try and hurt civilians, or it is going to be a location that the fight is going to occur because it's like UA in the east or it's UA in the west, one of those two, and how if UA is a battleground, it makes sense for Shiketsu to be a battleground. And also it could be a way of introducing other Shiketsu characters that we haven't seen, which include Inasa, Kami, as well as Seiji. So potentially that is another location where the battles in this war could be occurring, but the 2 areas that I think are most likely would be Hosu City and Fukuoka in Kyushu Prefecture. And I bring this up mainly because Hosu is the area where we are able to see Stain going all out, so would have thematic relevance in this war, and how the other areas that we are in most likely than not have ties to the story prior where major events occurred, such as Kamino, UA, Gonga Mountain, areas that were heavily involved with villain attack. So it makes sense for Hosu to be a part of that when it comes to Stain, and that could be potentially where Stain is, as well as where All Might is located, because Stain could be trying to kill All Might, or All Might will try to stop Stain if they are in the same area. As well as you have Kyushu, where Endeavor was able to fight against the Hooded Nomu, which is also another major area where there was a villain attack. So if there are going to be other fights in this war, or other locations where heroes are going to be fighting, where we can see characters such as Hagakure and Jiro, where we do not know where they are exactly, as well as other class members from Class 1B such as Kurohiro, Tokage, as well as Kendo could potentially be in those areas as well. Or they could be in areas that we've seen already and there could only be 8. And if I had to take a guess on where Hagakure and Jiro are in the 8 locations that we have seen, I think Jiro would be in the area where Shoji is because they have communication abilities, and because she technically has a mutant-based quirk, she would be fighting against Spinner, who is also a mutant-based quirk user, as well as other mutant-based quirk users, so there would be thematic relevance there. And I think Hagakure would probably be in the area where Fat Gum and Aoyama are, because it could show that even though she forgives Aoyama, that she may not necessarily trust him, but that her fighting alongside him would prove that even though Aoyama is a bat from Aesop's Fables, that he is still being accepted by one side, which would be the side of the heroes, by having Hagakure working alongside him. And that makes even more sense because she is the one who actually exposes him as the traitor. So they could pretty much be anywhere, but yeah, that's pretty much the location of where everyone is as far as the main cast is concerned, because we still don't know where Mirio is. He could be somewhere in UA and we just haven't seen him. He could be somewhere else, we just don't know. But the fact of the matter is we haven't seen where everyone is, so there is very high likelihood that we're going to see where Mirio is later on in the story or later on in the war. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about in this video. This is probably a slightly longer video, but this is a good video to come back to know where exactly everyone is and potentially where they are going to be going. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully this video was very informative. And if it was, leave a comment down below on what you liked about this video. Leave a like on the video if you liked it. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!